But now we're getting more and more men who are discovering their internal strength and foregoing their need for a physical strength. More and more men are focusing more on being emotionally stable or focusing on their mental health or learning that a lack of mental health can cause more chaos than a lack of physical health. So let's talk about something I've mentioned in a few videos recently that I haven't directly made a video about. And that's that there's a new kind of man evolving in our society. And this kind of man's existed for centuries, but only on the very fringes. And he's becoming more mainstream now, um, and becoming a bigger part of the population. But let's start with what most men typically have been throughout the history of humanity. And that is what I call warriors. Most men have been some version of a barrier between the dangers of the world and their families and communities. Most men have hunted or farmed or soldiers or they've been gathering or going out into the world and doing the things that need to get done. They're very physical. They're very physically demanding. Um, and those kinds of men have needed to be the the majority of men for most of human history, from back in the tribal days to early civilizations to even more modern civilizations. We have needed warriors. We have needed most men, the vast majority of men, to be a version of a warrior. And even the more settled versions, like farmers and smiths and other trades type jobs, trades type careers, have been more warrior like than not because they're still very physical with a warrior mindset, even if they don't necessarily have the warrior training. But they still think like warriors and they still have the body of warriors. And that's been true of mankind, of men, of the guys of our population for most of human history. Right on up, quite honestly, it was still true in the first part of the 20th century. We had two world wars during that time. So we absolutely needed warriors still even then. But in the last 2 or 3 or 4 generations, we've needed fewer and fewer warriors. Now, we will always need warriors until humanity stops being at war with itself, which I don't know that that will ever happen. So we will always need warriors. We're going to need them. We should be still um, producing them, reproducing them. And there will always be women who are attracted to those kinds of men so that they can reproduce, so that we can always have more warriors. And we need those. But I want to talk about the other kind of man, the kind of man I'm going to call a monk. And I don't mean the secluded, monk, and I don't mean the like the warrior type monk who lives in a monastery. I mean the monk who dedicates his life to internal strength, mental health, emotional strength, emotional fortitude. Um, he might have a physically less demanding body or less imposing body, but his internal capabilities are far superior to most people. He focuses on those. Um, and I'm calling him a monk, not necessarily because he stayed celibate or anything like that. And quite honestly, a lot of these guys still get married. And we've had them all throughout history. There's always been the intellectual types, the philosophers, but they've never, until recently, been any kind of a significant portion of our population. Our population has been vast majority warriors until recent generations. But now we're getting more and more men who are discovering their internal strength and foregoing their need for a physical strength. More and more men are focusing more on being emotionally stable or focusing on their mental health or learning that a lack of mental health can cause more chaos than a lack of physical health. So more and more men have been focusing on it. And by more and more, I don't mean the majority. By no means is this the majority of men. The majority of men are still warrior types. Even if they're mostly in trades and non-warrior type careers, they're still warrior types in that their physical presence is more important to their identity than their internal presences, their emotional and mental health presence. But the men who are coming up, the men who are becoming more and more prevalent, are evolving, and I'm using that word on purpose, are more and more focusing on their emotional stability, their emotional fortitude, and their mental health. And the reason I'm using that word of evolution, that word evolving, is because in order for evolution to happen, the women, the females of the species have to desire this new trait. And I think that's the change that's happening. Throughout most of human history, most women were attracted to the powerful warrior men. And there are still a majority of women who are still attracted to those men. And there's a growing portion of women who are attracted to physically softer but internally stronger men, to the men who focus on their emotional strength, their emotional fortitude, their emotional stability, their mental health stability, their ability to be stable emotionally. There are more and more women who are looking for a man less for his physical capabilities and more for his emotional capabilities, for his intellectual capabilities. And this is something I'm seeing emerging. This is something I'm seeing in my clients. This is something I'm seeing in my friends. This is absolutely something I'm seeing women that I know talking about, my female clients, my female friends talking about desiring more of in a man. Again, like I said, the majority of women still are attracted to those warrior types, and they are actually even more attracted to the warrior types who have that emotional stability. But there are a growing number of women who would rather forego the physical stability and have the emotional ones instead. And sometimes they actually want a softer body. There are plenty of women who actually are attracted to a softer body, what some call a dad bod. And there are various levels of fitness that some women are attracted to, just like there are various levels of fitness that some men are attracted to. There are various levels of fitness in women that some men are attracted to. So this new kind of man, how do you know if you are one of them? First of all, is it more important to you that you're emotionally stable, or is it more important to you that you're physically stable? Do you want to be mentally stable, mentally fit, or or physically fit? Which one's more important to you? And if you don't know, you're probably part of that warrior class, even though you're not necessarily strongly identifying with a warrior as a warrior. You probably still prefer to work with your hands, and or if not, if you want to work with your brains, you still like to work out some, or wish you did work out. The guys I'm talking about, the new evolution, the new type of man that's evolving, that's emerging, that's coming in, becoming more and more prevalent in our society, has a strong desire for a mental health, for an emotional stability. He desires he craves the practices that create a more mentally and emotionally stable life for himself. Um, what I've discovered is a lot of men who are genetically, because they have been bred this way. There's a few generations where the women were attracted to emotionally stable or potentially stable, emotionally stable men, and therefore they're producing children who are also trying to be emotionally stable. And a lot of these men who have the genes for emotional stability, even if they don't have the family history or the upbringing that creates that, but a lot of these men who have the genes for emotional stability are still trying to be warriors because that's what we've said in our that's what our world teaches, that's what our societies teach. Men have to be strong and independent and powerful. And what a lot of us who fit into this new category of men, this new type of man, what we miss is that it is just as masculine to be intellectually and emotionally strong and stable. In fact, the mountain and the weather analogy that I use to compare masculinity and femininity, the masculine is the mountain, and he can be physically a mountain. In other words, nothing she does physically can hurt him. Or he can be emotionally the mountain. In other words, nothing she does emotionally can hurt him. And this is, I think, where a lot of guys would fit, could fit, and genetically are designed to do, but don't know how to become that man. I think a lot of the mental health problems that a lot of guys are struggling with these days are either that they're a warrior and they're married to a woman who's attracted to the monk, or they're a monk and they're trying to be a warrior. A lot of the struggles that we have in our relationships these days are men trying to be something they're not. So over the coming weeks, I'm going to have more videos. We're going to talk more and more about this new kind of man and what his traits are, how to know you if you're one of them, and how to optimize your life and your relationships if you are more of a monk than a warrior. I look forward to talking to you more in those videos. Thank you for listening.